All righty. So we're going to go on. We're going to talk about Atman, Maya, karma, and other things here, but I'm going to stop talking for a second. I'm going to show you a video from that I got from Khan Academy. And so we're going to watch this short 7-8 minute video that will kind of draw this out for you, and then we're going to go back. But this is a good illustration. So picture's worth 1,000 words, and this video is really good. By the way, if you're not familiar with Khan Academy, Khan, it is a great resource for education. It's free, everything from mathematics to religion. I mean, it's just a wonderful, wonderful. I actually support it. It's to keep it going. I get stuff off Khan Academy all the time, and I find these type of things really, really helpful for me. So you ought to check it out. You check out things that you're interested on YouTube, you ought to check out Khan Academy. It's great stuff. And of course, a lot of their videos are on YouTube, and that's where I grab this one. But anyway, so I'm going to go ahead and turn the sound up a little bit here and shut up, because I got to be careful not to get a little feedback loop here. But here we go.
We're now going to talk about Hinduism, which is one of the largest religions on earth, practiced by over 1 billion people. And it's interesting for several reasons. First, it is considered to be one of the oldest religions that is still practiced. Some historians would place the origins of Hinduism at 5,000 years into the past. It has elements that may have been practiced in the Indus Valley civilization. You also have significant elements that come from the Vedic period. In fact, the Vedas, for which the Vedic period is named, really form the root of Hinduism as it is practiced today. And it is believed that the Vedas come from an Indo-Aryan people that many historians believe came from Central Asia and were related to many of the people who colonized Europe. Now, the other thing that is fascinating about Hinduism, and I really just referred to some of it, it is a combination of many cultures that really merged over thousands of years. And they merged around the Indian subcontinent. As you will see, there are many traditions, many cultures, many different ways that one can, and many different ways that people do practice Hinduism. But there are also 4 beliefs that we want to get to the heart of in this video, and we'll discuss more in future videos. Now, what's also interesting is where the name Hinduism or Hindu comes from, a Hindu being someone who practices Hinduism. The name for what we now call the Indus River in Sanskrit was Sindhu. And Sindh is still a region in the Indian subcontinent. The version that the Persians said was Hindus, and this got converted to Indus in Latin. So really, Hinduism is the term for the cultural and religious practices of people beyond the Indus River. The word India really comes from this same root. Indus is where India comes from, but Indus comes from Hindus, which comes from Sindhu, and these are all related to the word Hindu, and you can see that very clearly in the Persian version. Now, as I mentioned, there's many different practices in Hinduism, many different traditions, many different rituals in Hinduism, but I'm going to try to focus in on what could be considered the spiritual core, and a lot of this comes out of the Vedas. They're a collection of hymns, rituals, but also philosophy. And the subset of the Vedas that are very concerned with the spiritual and the philosophical are known as the Upanishads, which means sitting down or coming near to. Some people say coming near to God. Some people say coming near to the actual reality, or coming near to a teacher, as in sitting down to get a lesson or to have a dialogue. Now, the central idea in Hinduism is the idea of Brahman. And Brahman should not be confused with the god Brahma. Brahma is sometimes you could view as an aspect of Brahman, but Brahman is viewed as the true reality of things. It is shapeless, genderless, bodiless. It cannot be described. It can only be experienced. Now, according to Hindu belief, we are all part of Brahman. And what we perceive as our individuality is really, you can consider to be a quasi-illusion. So this might be one individual right over here, and then we might have another individual right over here. And this separateness, the illusion of the reality that we see around us, this is referred to as Maya. And Maya is not just the illusion or the quasi-illusion created by our senses. It is even notions like our ego, our identity. And within that context, that inner self, that thing that is even within our, that is even deeper than our sense of identity, this is referred to as Atman. And as you can see, the way it's been diagrammed here, the way we've drawn it out, Atman is essentially the same thing as a Brahman. And oftentimes you will see it referred to as Atman dash Brahman. They're really the same thing, but it's really it's an illusion that there is this separateness of our reality. Now, according to Hindu belief, in each life, you have this core part of yourself, which is Atman, which is part of Brahman. And when you die, it doesn't disappear, but it will take on or it will subjugate itself to another reality. So after death, this individual or this perceived individual might take on another identity and another reality. They would perceive it as another life. And this notion of one life after another, one reality after another, is sometimes referred to as transmigration of the soul, sometimes referred to as reincarnation, or this notion of samsara, which is this endless cycle of birth and rebirth that really comes from this notion of same flowing, this thing, this pattern that goes on and on and on. And according to Hindu belief, what that next life is, what that next reality is based on your actions in this life. Karma literally is referring to actions, but it's really actions driving consequences, not only in this reality, but in the next reality. Now, there's another notion of dharma. Dharma is based on what is the role you should play given the reality, given the life that you are in. So in a very simplified way, you could say, well, dharma is the rightful role, the rightful actions, your duty, depending on your role, depending on your reality. Karma is how that action translates into consequences, which is going to drive what happens in this endless cycle. Now, a core idea of Hinduism is to try to escape from this cycle, to awaken to the true reality, awaken from this quasi-reality. And this is really one of the central ideas of the Upanishads, that eventually, if you can awaken, so let's say that this is an awakening, this entity, this Atman, this self right over here, this perceived individual has now awoken and can see through, pierces the veil of that Maya. Now they have rejoined Brahman, and they've recognized that Atman and Brahman are the same. And this freeing from samsara, from this birth-death cycle, this is referred to as moksha. Now, to make this idea a little bit clearer, let's look at some quotes from the actual Upanishads. So this is two versions from the Isha Upanishad. And the reason why I like to show it is because it shows that if you're translating from Sanskrit into English, or really from any one language into another, there's going to be some room for interpretation, but we can see it here. So this is from the Isha Upanishad, which is considered one of the most important ones. It's a subset, it's a section of the Yajur Veda, one of the 4 early Vedas. And they write, and this is an English translation, the wise man beholds all beings in the self, or the Atman, and the self in all beings. For that reason, he does not hate anyone. To the seer, all things have verily become the self. What delusion, what sorrow can there be for him who beholds that oneness? This is another version of the same verses from the Isha Upanishad. He who sees all beings in the self and the self in all beings, he never turns away from it, the self. For he who perceives all beings as a self, how can there be delusion or grief when he sees this oneness everywhere? So I might be getting into an argument with someone, but deep down, if I recognize that both myself and that individual, that we are part of this same Brahman, that he is me and I am it, or I am he, well, then that anger seems a little bit misguided. Now, to get a little bit more context on this notion of oneness, here's another verse from the Chandogya Upanishad, which is also considered one of the significant Upanishads, and it's part of the Samaveda. As the rivers flowing east and west merge in the sea and become one with it, forgetting they were separate rivers, so do all creatures lose their separateness when they merge at last into pure being, into Brahman. There is nothing that does not come from him. And the use of the word him is really an anthropomorphism of this notion that has really no gender or body or form. Of everything, he is the inmost self. He is the truth. He is the self supreme. You are that. Shivet Taketu. You are that. And this last verse is referring, it's in this Chandogya Upanishad, it's a conversation between the teacher and the son. And the son is Shveta Ketu. My apologies for pronunciation. So once he's saying that these rivers is an analogy for you and I, and we might see ourselves as different, but at some point we will flow and become one with the ocean. And he's pointing out to his son, you are not different from that. You, yourself, your Atman, it is Brahman. It is one and the same.
Okay, so that's, by the way, that's a good video to rewatch a couple of times until it kind of sinks in. I've watched it dozens of times, and it always helps me a lot, and just to kind of clarify, because it's being communicated to us in a language that we can understand, but it's giving us a view into something that is totally different than the way we normally conceptualize the universe. So I will be drawing some diagrams and constantly referring to this Brahman, Atman, and samsara, and moksha, and all of these type of things. But that was a really good, really helpful illustration, I think. So let's talk about Atman a little bit. Atman is the self, the true self, the essence or the entity of life. It's the self is deeper than your mind. It's deeper than yourself, your subconscious. It's deeper than but it's the real you at the very core of your existence. You can't see me, but I'm reaching. Hang on a second here. No. You still can't see, but I'm all right. Never mind. But I'm pointing to my just below my, just down here. In our heart, we would often say, it's who we are. We clearly, the real us is something that is spiritual, what we would refer to as the spirit or the soul. That's the real us. The real us lives in a body. Right? And in circumstances that, the body lives in circumstances, but that's not the real us. The real us is Atman, and whatever Atman is the same stuff, essence that Brahman is. So this is the real you. Typically we refer to it as the self or the soul, but it's at the deepest level. The very deepest level. And much of life is trying to peel away the layers of all this other existence to get to that core. It's the core of who we really are. And it's the thing that survives and goes to inhabit another body in another lifetime over and over and over again, till it is freed from that, being caught in this cycle of life and death and rebirth. And it's freed through moksha, escape, liberation, salvation, to once again be just in union with Brahman, just to experience human union with Brahman, where there is no separation between Brahman and Atman, because it's all that's erased, all that's gone. So it's a hard concept to get, but it's similar to concepts that we're used to in the West, which for instance, in the Jewish, Christian, Muslim tradition, when God created humankind, God breathes into us the breath of life, God's life. And we learn to recognize that it's the life of God that is at the core of individual human existence. And that's why we should respect other human beings. So we refer to it as the very essence or the life of God that's been breathed into us. Hinduism understands how all this transpires differently, but it's essentially the same thing, that we already have this connection to the ultimate, but we need to dig deep to experience it purely. So I don't want to get too confusing here. So this is not a foreign idea, but we need to understand how it's thought of and how it's conceptualized in the life of someone who's living as a Hindu, how they live it out. So the self travels through time. In the Hindu idea, time is finite. Well, matter of fact, it's finite. Time is finite in all of our ideas as people. Time is something that we understand is something that we experience as created beings, but doesn't exist for God, right? So in Hinduism, the idea is that time itself will come to an end. Essentially, God has always existed and always will exist, right? So when time is something that is temporary, it's temporal, time, and it comes to an end for each self at some point. Now, in Hinduism, you've got a bunch of times around the, circling around seemingly around the drain for maybe thousands of lifetimes before you can actually escape. And once again, just exist in the eternal status of union with Brahma. But we're located in time now. So time will come to an end for each self. When that self develops, matures, grows to transcend time and moves into the timeless ultimate self of the universe, Brahma. So essentially we can say that the person, the real us, the real you, is trapped in time. And this is a fundamental understanding in Hinduism, that we are trapped in a cycle of life, death, and rebirth. And if we can get free of that, we are free from time and we are just eternal. The next concept that we need to be aware of, which was mentioned in the video, is the concept of Maya, or illusion. It's basically an illusion to we have this illusion that we are actually separate from Brahma. There's some sort of a separation, but eventually that separation will be dissipated. And we'll realize, we will come to self-realization that we are Brahman. And Brahman is us. Now, my first introduction to Hindu thought was in 1969, a while ago, when I was a freshman at the University of Wisconsin. Actually, I wasn't a freshman, I was a junior. A sophomore, junior, somewhere in that area. But the University of Wisconsin, Madison, I grew up Jewish. You know that story already. But I began to investigate other religious ideas, other philosophical and religious ideas, because I frankly wasn't happy, fulfilled, didn't feel that I have a sense of meaning. And in what I was experiencing, I just was looking for something more significant, more substantial than what I been exposed to in my Jewish upbringing or with my Christian friends. I was looking for something more real, something deeper. And so I did some really stupid and silly things, which I highly don't recommend, but we all, go out there and start trying stuff. And one of the things that I tried is because it wasn't something that I just thought up on my own. So, well, this would be a cool thing to do. There was a real strong wave of interest in psychedelic experiences. It was all part of the Cultural Revolution that was going on there. And I began to experiment with hallucinogenic substances, LSD, mescaline, psilocybin, mushrooms, right? To try to have an experience that was outside of the normal. Anyway, without getting lost in this, and this is not a good way to do it. I know a lot of people who got really screwed up, and some people I know who dove into this stuff got lost in the mental hallucinations and ended up committing suicide because they were just kind of lost. But I had my own sense of loss on an LSD trip in 1969. Without telling you the whole story, but at some point when the LSD was really reaching its peak, I began to experience not visual hallucinations, but mental hallucinations where my thoughts began to change. And I was actually, I can tell you this briefly. So I took this drug and this hallucinogenic drug, and I took it with a partner. It was safe practice, two of you together, not to be alone, because when these mental hallucinations start, you can get lost, and you could walk in front of a car and just get run over because you're so, you're out of it, so you're not really focused on the physical reality, you're in your head. And anyway, I got separated from, well, the two of us went down to, his name was Barry Steinman. He was actually in the same Jewish fraternity that I was in, Zeta Beta Tau. But anyway, we went down to the student union because this is in springtime, beginning of summer. And we walked down to the student union because it was on the lake and they had this beautiful lawn out there with nice trees for shade. It was just a great place to go picnic or just sit by the lake and just to chill, right? Anything other than studying was a good thing, so it was just a place to go get. And while I was there, and this is just when the drug is beginning to, kind of stimulate my thoughts and all this kind of stuff. Well, so we walked down there and we planted ourselves underneath a tree and just sitting there looking. And at one point I just kind of laid back like this. I was looking up at the clouds and the sky and, kind of looked over here. And then I kind of rolled on my left side. And I noticed that there were a group of girls sitting about 15, 20 feet away from me. And one of them was this girl that I'd never met, but I'd seen her a bunch of times. And I was just smitten with her. Never met her. Didn't know who she was. I just seen her and I just had a crush. I was just smitten with her. I was just incredibly attracted to her. You understand how that works. So as I saw her, as I rolled over on my left side and saw her sitting over here, I caught her eye and she caught mine and she smiled back at me. And so, whoa, my heart. Now, so I thought, well, maybe I'll just kind of move over there and introduce myself, because I've been wanting to meet her and hopefully go out on a date, right? So I kind of rolled over further on my side to do it. Now, by this time, the impact of the hallucinogens in my system were getting pretty serious. but I was still functional. And I rolled over on my side. And as I kind of propped myself to get up and kind of walk over there and introduce myself, I rolled right into some dog do. Now, because of the hallucinogen, all my senses were peaked. And now all I could, first of all, I was humiliated. I couldn't walk over there now, covered, my arm was covered in stuff. And, obviously that's, I had to go back to the fraternity house and get cleaned up. That blew my whole social life there, my potential social life. But on top of that, also, the smell was particularly strong because of the hallucinogens that were running through my system. So everything was heightened. All my awareness was really heightened. And now all I can think about is the smell. And so I got to get back. I got to get out of these clothes. I got to go take a shower for 45 minutes and try and get this off. And you know how that smell won't go away, right? Even if you're clean, you can still smell it. So anyway, so I said, I'm going to go back to the fraternity house where I was staying, and I'm going to take a shower, and I'm going to get changed clothes, and then hopefully I can get back there. Maybe she'll still be there, and I can go introduce myself, and maybe we can laugh about it. So I took the route back from where I was to the fraternity house, and and I took the route along the lake because that was the most direct route. But it also passed by all the dumpsters from all the dormitories and fraternity houses that bordered the lake. And this was just after finals week. So, and the drinking age at University of Wisconsin was 18, right? So all the fraternities would have beer on tap in these big kegs. And now, and there were a lot of ruined carpets and empty kegs and all kinds of beer stained stuff that was in these dumpsters. And so not only am I smelling the remnants of the dog do on me, now I'm smelling all the garbage and all the filth and stuff like that from all the parties that have been taking place with the end of finals week. And so now I'm totally lost in what is quickly becoming a very bad trip, as we would say. And this is really affecting my whole perspective on everything. And I went and took a 45-minute shower. I used all the hot water in the fraternity house. I could still smell it. I was still affected by it. And now the drug is getting really, really strong. And I've lost contact with Barry because he didn't follow me. He didn't want to be around me. He stayed and talked to the girls, right? But, so I lost contact with him, and I began to lose, I forgot, I lost touch with the fact that I'd actually taken a drug. All I knew is I was having this intense experience on every level, and it wasn't very good. It was, it was horrible. And so all my thoughts became very morose and things like that. So I finally just said, okay, I got to get my mind clear. And so I went and sat on the steps to the lake just outside the fraternity house. There were some concrete steps that went down to a dock that no longer existed. So there were a lot of bushes and stuff. They didn't all go all the way down. They were just partial steps. I'm sitting there trying to compose myself. And of course, this drug is at its peak now. And it's, so my thoughts are going just all over the place. And so I just kind of took a deep breath and just looked up at the sky again. Well, now that beautiful sky had begun to turn dark because a huge thunderstorm was coming in across the lake, these dark, ominous clouds, which really fit my mood. And in that moment, I had this thought, realization, that I was not separate from the universe, that I was part of God and God was part of me. And so from my standpoint, I was saying, oh, I'm really God. I'm not just a human being. I'm part of something greater. And I began to think of myself as God. And of course, I interpreted those ominous clouds to be that I had decided as God to end the world. This is a bad trip, right? This is, it's pretty bad. Well, this whole thing happened in like 2 minutes, of sitting there, and time transpired. And now it's beginning to rain. And it's raining cats and dogs. And I like the dogs, but I don't like the cats. But anyway, it's starting to get really, but I'm still sitting there thinking that I'm God and the end of the world's approaching. So I'm cool with that because I've become enlightened. I've realized that I'm God and God is me and I am God. We're really all part of God, but I had realized it and I was only thinking about myself now. So if the world ends, that's not such a horrible thing, but this is all confusing thought. And I can still remember all the confusion today. This was 1969, so it was a long time ago. This is a powerful experience. As I was sitting there, now that idea that I am God and that I'm part of God and that I am one with God, that's this idea of Brahman and Atman. That's a Hindu idea. That's what I had come to. It was a Hindu experience, a Hindu religious experience. Of course, at that moment, it was beginning to rain, I felt somebody tap me on the shoulder. And it was a young blonde-haired, blue-eyed kid who I later found out was a freshman. He was just a farm boy from Wisconsin. Good-looking kid, but he said to me, he said, "Are you okay?" He sees me sitting out here in the rain and this really, so he came to rescue me. He said, "Are you all right? Is anything okay?" And I said, "Oh, I'm okay. You may be in some trouble, though, because I'm God and it's the end of the world." And he said to me, "Oh, I got some really good news for you." I said, "Well, okay." He says, "You're not God." And when he said it, it was like he knew that I wasn't God. Like, he knew who God was and he knew that it wasn't me. Right. So, he didn't say, "You're not God," but when he said it, it was real. He clearly had a different perception of these things. He says, "And it's not the end of the world yet." I said, "What do you mean yet?" And then he began to tell me about Jesus. Jesus was God and there was going to be an end of the world in the future and all this kind of stuff. Well, I'm Jewish. Start talking to me about Jesus. It means absolutely nothing. And then he began to try and he said, "Come on back." And so we went, let's get out of the rain. He took me back to his apartment where he and his older brother lived, who was also a student, who, by the way, his older brother was dating the girl that I had been interested in. So I found that out later. He already, so she was smiling at me, but she wasn't interested in me. But anyway, and they helped me come down from the trip. And then they began to try and tell me about Jesus. Well, that didn't work. But I'll tell you more about that story at a later time. But the whole point is I had a Hindu-like experience where I came to this same understanding through artificial means, but nevertheless, I experienced this of the sense of myself being actually part of the ultimate. And that's, I don't recommend that you do this just so you understand this point, but I tell you the story so you can get a gist of what's going on here. It's this intimate connection between you and God rather than what we normally think of as separation. God is up there and above and the creator, and we are the creation. So the creation is not the same thing as the creator. That's a Western concept. But in Hinduism, the creation is part of the creator, and the creator is the creation. That's the thing, the most important thing that we need to recognize as an essential of this relationship between Atman, the self, and Brahman being the same, just separated by circumstances, most of which is an illusion. And what we're spending most of our life doing is getting rid of the illusion that there's any type of separation. And then we realize that we are in union, that we aren't actually separated. We're never separated. We just think of ourselves as separate. That's what Hinduism is trying to say. So this will lead us to this concept, which is at the bottom of the screen, because we're running out of time here, so we're going to continue the rest of this later. But this concept of Ahimsa, which is the universal regard for life. It plays out in nonviolence, but it's the understanding that in every being, not just human beings, but dogs and cows and cats, anything, any being that has life, that life, which is the core of their existence, that livingness, that beingness, is Atman. And so you want to look at every person that you meet as God. At their core, they are God. Just like at your core, you are God. So you wouldn't want to go around trying to kill them, right? So this is where Ahimsa comes from. This is why many Hindus are vegetarians, not vegans, but vegetarians. They don't eat living creatures. They can eat plants. They have a different type of life. That's not Atman. But they don't eat that. Right? So these are how these things connect up. And what I'm going to try to do is throughout this study is try and say, okay, how do people live this? I mean, we can talk about theory and theology and philosophy and all these kind of things, but it's, what's the experience like? How do you live it out? Right? That's what we want to focus on here. So what's it like to live this with these understandings and this perspective of the universe around us? Yeah. So that's what we're going to be doing through the rest of this. So, but we will talk more about karma, and we've already, I think, talked about Maya enough. Karma is just the law of action, but we'll spend a lot of time on that coming up very, very soon. But we're going to have some more things to deal with. In the next part, we're going to talk about the cycle of life, death, and rebirth known as samsara. We're going to talk about moksha. We're going to talk, and then this is the end of this particular PowerPoint, but then we're going to go on and we're going to go through these things one at a time. And as we get through next week, we will have covered the core ideas that make the Hindu experience unique. And then you'll be able to begin to work on your essay that you're going to do on this. All right, we're out of time. I've gone 10 seconds over. I owe you 10 seconds. Bye-bye.